friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird Snow Day. So I have stamped out the images I'll be using on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. I'm also going to be coloring to match some pattern paper from the Echo Park Winter 6x6 pad. So I'm going to take this piece here and tuck it under my cardstock panel to use as inspiration for my color palette. I will be coloring with my Copic markers, and I'm going to start with my polar bear. For him, I'm going to use E40, E41, and E42. So I'm going to start with the E42 and begin to lay in some shadows. I'm going to put those right up under his hat, also a little bit on his muzzle and his ears, the undersides of his arms, under the scarf where that would be casting a shadow on his neck and back there, and then down the backs of his legs, and of course his little tail. And then I'm going to come in with my mid-tone, which is the E41, and begin to blend that out. I'm still sticking very close to the outside edges because I want him to look like a polar bear. I don't want him to look, tan. So I'm being very careful to leave plenty of white space so he doesn't start looking too brown. Then I'm going to come in with the E40 and I'm going to blend that out even further, but you can see that I'm still not filling in all of that white space. I want to leave some of that, just the bare natural cardstock. I will grab a colorless blender and go over the edge of the E40 to help that transition into that white space so that he really does look nice and defined, but he still looks like a nice white polar bear, which polar bears aren't really white anyway. If you look at them in photos, they have kind of like a beige kind of like a beige tint to them. So that's why I really like these E40s for that. And then I'm also going to use these shades for the whites of my fox, so his little face and the inner part of his ear and his tail. He also does have a white patch on his stomach, but I didn't see it right now, so I'm going to have to come back to that a little bit later. While that ink is fairly wet, I want to add in my rosy cheeks, and I just want to do that while it's wet so that that ink will kind of disperse and spread out and make it a little bit more blended. So I chose RV10 and RV11 for that. I went with these cooler toned pinks since this is a winter card. I wanted to add a little bit of darkness on the bear's muzzle just to give him a little more interest. So I went with T1, T3, and T5 for that. I did a little bit of T5 up on the bridge where his forehead would be casting that in shadow, and then blended down with the T3 and the T1. And then I decided to do my fox in these grays as well. I very rarely do gray foxes because I really love orange foxes, but I thought that the muted, soft, wintry color palette, that orange was just going to stand out too much and be a little bit more in your face. It would definitely draw attention to the fox. And for this particular card, I wanted the polar bear to kind of be the main character and the fox to be like the sidekick character. So I wanted him to be in these more muted tones. So I'm going to do a little gray fox, or he could also be like a little wolf. I think he could definitely be either. So I used that T5 once again to lay in my shadows. I did them the same way that I did the bear since they're both facing in the same direction. Just a little bit to kind of define the outer part of the face, and then down the back of the body, the underside of the arms, the backs of the legs, and the underside of the tail. And then I came in with the T3 to blend that out. And now I'm working with my lightest shade, the T1, and I'm making sure to really work over the edge of that T3 and go back and forth in those little circular scribbling motions to really break up the edge of that so I get a nice smooth blend. I want him to look nice and furry and seamless and not have any harsh lines there. So just using those little scribbling motions is going to really help with that. And then here you can see I realized that I left that little part on his tummy blank, so I just used the E40 and E41 for that since it was super small. For the bear's hat, I wanted to use that navy color in that pattern paper as the inspiration. So I went with B93, B95, and B97. And I'm adding the darkest shade, the B97, at the back of the head, where the head is kind of tilted back away from the light. And I also put a little shadow right under the ear where that fabric is kind of gathered. And then I began to blend that out with the B95, and I'm just pulling that to like an equal part on the two stripes that go across the head, and then just finishing it out on the one that just is the dangly part down by the ear. And then I'm going to use the B93 as my lightest, but I didn't feel like there was enough contrast there for me, so I did decide to pull in the B99 to make that a little bit darker. So I went back and added that, and I was trying to decide if I wanted to just leave it, but I did decide to blend that out and do a second layer because I still felt like there wasn't enough contrast on the rest of the hat, that the B95 and the B93 had kind of blended into a similar tone. So going over that with the second layer is going to really beef up that saturation and create a little bit more of a dynamic look. So I'm going to just finish the rest of that with the B93. And then for the little stripes that go across the hat, I wanted them to be paler, so I decided to pull in B91, and I just colored those in solids since they were super thin. Then I'm moving down to his scarf, and I wanted that to match the hat, but I didn't want to do it in the super dark colors because I felt like it might get really heavy. So I decided to mix it up and go with the lightest three shades here for the background color. So I started with the B95 as my darkest and just laid in a bit of shadow, kind of emphasized the little crease at the throat there. And then I blended that out with the B93, and I'm going to fill in with the B91 as the highlight. And then I'm going to go to that B99, that darkest shade, and just fill in the little stripes on the end of the scarf with that, so everything ties in together. And then the same with the gloves, I wanted those to match as well. So I'm doing the same thing as the scarf. I'm starting with the B95, blending out with the B93, using the B91 as the highlight, and then the B99 for the cuffs. For the fox's scarf, I wanted to go with that minty green pine looking branch that's in that pattern paper. I'm going to point to it so that you can see which one I mean. So I chose G00, G00, and G02. The G02 is a bit dark, so I decided to skip that at first and see how I went with just the G00 as the darkest. But I felt like it needed just a tiny bit more contrast to beef it up, so I put just the barest amount of that G02 in there for a little bit of definition in those darkest places and also on the mittens. And then I blended that out again with the G02 and left a nice bit of room there for that G00, because that palest shade is really the one that represents that color in that pattern paper the most, but I just wanted a bit more pop, I guess, on the images. And then the little pom-poms on the ends I'm gonna just do with the G02. And then the pom-poms on the bear's hat, I use B000. Just add a little bit of shading to those so they still look kind of white, but not the same color as the polar bear. And then for the skis, I kind of went back and forth, but I ended up deciding to go with kind of like a cool toned black, since there were those clusters of black leaves in that pattern paper. So I'm going to use C5, C7, and C9. I don't use C9 that often because it is really dark, like it's nearly black. But those leaves really did have that super dark look, and so I decided to add just a touch of it at the bottom of each of the skis to give them that definition. And then I blended out with the C7, but I still only used about maybe half of the space of each of the skis for the two darkest shades, and then the other half is going to be just the highlight with the C5, because I didn't want them to look so dark that you kind of lose what the object even is, because it's so just solid and doesn't have much of a highlight. So adding that nice thick highlight in there, it's about half of the image, is going to still make it very clear what they are supposed to be. You can see all of the outline at the top edge there that the artist has drawn. So I just filled in those, and then I wanted to add a little bit of definition to the eyes, as I usually do. So I grabbed my Sakura black jelly roll pen, got that started off to the side. It still wasn't flowing very well. I think I need a new one. But I did go over the eyes of both of my critters to make them nice and black and shiny. And then I wanted to add a little detail to the fox's scarf. So I'm going to use a white Sakura gel pen to do a plaid pattern. I just did some diagonal lines going one direction, and then came back and crossed over them going the opposite direction. It doesn't show up super well on that light colored scarf, but it does add a little bit of something. And then I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. So next I wanted to go back to that Echo Park Winter 6x6 pad and flip through and find something that I want to use as my background. So I'm just going to go through until I find this large snowflake, which I thought would be super pretty behind our images. So I'm going to trim these two pieces down. The one that we use for the inspiration, I'm going to cut down with the Hello Bluebird gallery frame number 4. And then that's going to give me all these little pieces that I can pop out. I could save those for another project. For today, I just want the frame. And then I also cut down 2 more pieces of white cardstock with the Slimline Hill and Dale. You could use the regular version, but I just don't have it. And then the back of one of those windows had this really pretty soft blue with tiny snowflakes. So I die cut that with one of the little tag banners that is also in that same die set. I'm going to pop that in my Misty, and I'm going to stamp my sentiment on that for something different today. I'm stamping in Lawn Fawn Deep Sea ink, and I'm using the sentiment that says warm winter hugs. So that stamped pretty well the first time, but I know this ink does dry back a bit, so I decided to stamp it one more time to make it nice and bold. And then I'm going to do an insert for the inside of my card. I just trimmed this panel down with my paper trimmer, so it is 4 by 5 1/4. I'm stamping on that in the same Deep Sea ink, and I'm using all the rest of these images and the sentiment are also in that Snow Day stamp set. So I used another couple of adorable critters and some snowflakes. And then I'm going to glue that to the inside of a Lawn Fawn Blue Jay card base. So because I trimmed that down, there's going to be just a little sliver of border on the outside edge, which I think just makes it look a little bit more professional. And then I'm ready to bring in the rest of my background pieces. So I want this scene to look super snowy, so I'm going to start with the larger snowdrift, and I'm adhering that down to that snowflake pattern. And then I'm going to take the smaller snowdrift and tuck that in behind the first one, so it makes it look like that snow is really piled up high. I'll glue that to my card front. And then the frame that I die cut with that inspiration pattern, I added some foam tape to the back of that. I just trimmed it down into thinner strips, and I'm going to pop that up on the card to give that a little bit more definition and really frame in our scene nicely. And then I can grab those images and also the sentiment. The sentiment I want to tuck over to the side, but I didn't want that little hole to show, so I just trimmed that off. And I decided that I wanted that popped up on the card as well, so it would be level with the frame. So I just added a piece of foam tape to the back of that, and then I'm going to tuck that under the right edge of that frame so that it kind of sticks out a bit. And then I've got my two images. I just want to make sure I have them placed on the card right so that the fox's ear isn't like touching that banner. So I just used him there as a placeholder while I adhere my polar bear, and I'm using my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue, which I really love because it has that super fine nozzle, so you can get in all those little thin pieces like those skis. And then I'll add my little fox down lower as if they are skiing across this pure field of snowy white. So I think this card was absolutely begging for some Stardust stickles, especially on the top edge of those snow drifts where the snow always looks so sparkly in, the light. So I just went around those two snowdrifts and kind of defined the edges with a little bit of that Stardust stickles and gave them a nice glistening top edge there to set them apart from each other. And then I wanted to do something up in the sky as well, but the snowflakes are so large and I love them that size, but I felt like if I added any sequins or anything like that, it would just look too busy. So I decided to just fill in the very center of each snowflake with a tiny dot of that Stardust stickles, so that when you tip it in the light, it has that bit of sparkle and that extra interest to it. And I did also fill in the pom-poms on the bear's hat with this as well. And that stickles is a little hard to see, so I will lift that up so you can see how it catches the light and also give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this Winter Wonderland card. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss any videos. I post new ones every Monday and Friday, and occasional bonus videos. Hint, there will be one tomorrow. All of the products I used will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below the video, so please check them out there. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.